Thank you so much to my colleague, Madam Speaker. Today I wanted to introduce myself not just to the great people of Florida's 7th District, but to the rest of America. While I may not be in your district and your exact representative, if you believe in our constitutionality, if you believe in the rights, liberties, and freedoms in which American exceptionalism once excelled in, then I will be your representative. You see, I came from very humble upbringings. Grew up in a small town called Auburndale, Florida, in Central Florida. My mother and father both suffered from drug and substance abuse issues, were in and out of prison nearly all of my life. My father spent nearly 30 years. My mother spent nearly 7. I bounced house to house until I was finally adopted and taken in by my grandparents. That's a very humbling experience for me, not just because so many Americans today are suffering from these things, but to also understand that I can hear your plight, and also that I understand the significant importance of being a nuclear family member. You see, my grandparents didn't have much. My grandfather was a welder. My grandmother used to do hair on the back patio for women in the community. We lived on very little after my grandfather's disability. But the one thing that we always had was our love, our faith, and this nation. You see, I went on to go and serve in the 82nd Airborne, to be a member of the Joint Special Operations Command, to serve honorably in our armed forces, and to go on to be a Bronze Star recipient. My socioeconomic status and how I was born or into what family did not define who I am. And that's something very rare in this world. That's something that only exists here in America. I've been honored and been blessed to create tremendous businesses with my wife, where we've gone on to serve over 200 of our law enforcement departments, SRT, HRT, the FDLE, Department of Corrections, as well as for our members of the armed forces. You see, in my family, we truly believe in the ideas of defend, not defund our men and women in blue, and that matters to us. I would just like to add that as I stand here, willing to serve yet again in a new uniform, I want you to know that accountability, transparency, and accessibility to your members should be a top priority. And that also means the accountability of the wrongdoings of our federal government, whether it's the overstepping of the state and individual rights and violations of the 10th Amendment, or whether it's getting accountability for the wrongdoings of open borders, a failed Afghan withdrawal, and the America Last policies that has threatened our energy independence. You see, I know something about these failed withdrawals. When Congressman Ronnie Jackson out of Texas reached out to me, he had a mother and 3 children, Miriam, who has a 15-year-old boy, an 11-year-old little girl, and a 2-year-old little girl. They were left behind in Afghanistan after the Biden administration chose to abandon Bagram Air Base to hand over to the Chinese, that enabled over 40,000 Taliban, Haqqani, and ISIS Khorasan to be released from their detention centers. But it also shut down the commercial flights that many Americans had planned to return home. You see, this mother and 3 children only wanted to do one thing: return back home to America. But when Ronnie Jackson called the Department of Defense and the Department of State under this Biden administration, they failed to answer the call. That's why when he called me, we put together a great team that went over, and after 11 days and 3 failed attempts, the Biden administration not only threatened to shoot down an aircraft of Americans, which was a November aircraft, who was there to save other Americans, but he thwarted us in 3 other efforts. But the great thing about America is that we're not defined by the minority, which is our federal government. We are defined by the voice of the American people, which is the majority that cannot be silenced. And that is why after 11 days, multiple attempts, crossing into unpermissible environments, we were able to rescue and conduct the very first successful overland rescue of Americans out of Afghanistan and return that mother and her 3 children back who finished out their school year. Madam Speaker, the one thing I believe in is action. And while I take up this time to speak before you today, I want you to know that that is not what the American people are about, is politicians speaking, but acting. When it came to the 2020 riots, we didn't sit back and ask to defend and dismantle our law enforcement. My wife and I, we stood strong as we donated hundreds of thousands of dollars in less lethal goods to defend our law enforcement, our communities, their businesses, and their homes. If I've learned nothing in my time in the military as a combat veteran, as a business owner, as a foreign policy expert, and as an American, it is that it is time for action. I thank you for this time, and with that, I yield back.